And I've written magazines revolving around questions like, magazine articles about questions like, what is it like to drive the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile? You know, you're driving this 30-foot-long hot dog around the country. What is it like to parallel park a hot dog? And that wound up being the cover of one of those airline magazines, U.S. Airways. It was the Wienermobile, because I was watching TV one day, the idea popped into my head, and I said, I think I want to find out about it. So anything could be fodder for an idea. And as a writer, every project that I pursue, every assignment that I tackle is like a mini education for me. An opportunity to learn about a subject that I deemed fascinating enough to spend some time pursuing. And that education never goes away, because we all know that as a writer, when you're writing about something, you're intensely focused on learning about that. And it sort of enters a part of your brain where it never actually goes away. That's why I'm really good at trivia. Most of it's useless, but I wound up being on the show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire 18 years ago, I think this month. And why? Because I'm a writer. Because I learned stuff and it stuck. And then I ended up writing about being on that show, so it was this whole circular thing. Okay, back to fishing for a moment. When we're pursuing good ideas, many of us are essentially fishing in the same spot. It might be the popular spot at the moment, but at some point your creative hook sort of gets lost in the crowd. At some point you want to find your own unique place to drop your line. So I like to zig when the rest of the world is zagging. And one way I do that is by surprising the reader, by introducing the unexpected, by making people rethink things. One way I do that is by countering conventional wisdom. What do I mean by that? Well, I'll give you a couple examples. I once wrote a magazine article about the most famous misquotes in history. By that I mean, well, for example, Sherlock Holmes. Believe it or not, in none of the 44 stories that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote about Sherlock Holmes did his detective ever actually say, "Elementary, my dear Watson." Never said it. He said elementary, he said, "My dear Watson." He never put the two together. That came later in the movies. Captain Kirk. In none of the original 79 Star Trek episodes did he ever actually say, "Beam me up, Scotty." That would be on his tombstone, but he never actually put those four words together. I'm forgetting his name now. Who's the guy who says "you dirty rat"? James Cagney, thank you. He never said it. He never said "you dirty rat." He said worse things, but he never said that in the movie. So those are famous misquotes, and there's dozens of them. Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt and all kinds of things. So I put those together in an article, and it surprises the reader, and it's compelling when the reader sees the unexpected. I'll give you another example. It's my favorite example. I once wrote about a study that my old college professor did, who I'm still in touch with him. He actually came through Pacific Grove a few months ago, and I had lunch with him. And I love this because it's the epitome of countering conventional wisdom. Basically, he examined Olympic medalists. And he had neutral observers examine their reactions right after they found out where they finished in an event, and then later on the medal stand. And what he discovered is that on the whole, bronze medalists are actually more satisfied than silver medalists. It's counterfactual thinking. It depends who you compare yourself to. It actually comes from an old Jerry Seinfeld bit. I wish I could imitate his voice, but I can't. But the bit was, he said, when you think about it, if you win the gold, you feel good. If you win the bronze, you think, well, at least I got something. But if you win the silver, it's like, congratulations, you almost won. Out of all the losers, you're the number one loser. But that's really what that study was all about. And it's funny, but there's also something profound in that. And I always feel that, again, if the world expects you to zig and come up with an idea that zags, it's more compelling. Okay, back to fishing. My dad always taught me, when he taught me how to fish at that summer camp in Wisconsin, he always taught me that when you feel a nibble at the end of your line, don't suddenly jerk your fishing rod, you're going to lose that fish. What you have to do is wait for a stronger nibble, and then a slightly stronger nibble, and then a big bite, and then you can reel in that fish. How does that apply to creativity? Well, writing, like fishing, can be a case of waiting and waiting until you get the right notion or a nibble of an idea. Sometimes you have to be really patient. In fact, I'm reminded of what a comedian, Stephen Wright, once said. He said, "There's a fine line between fishing and just standing on the shore like an idiot." And it's true. Sometimes you catch nothing. Patience can be a virtue, but particularly when you're trying to be creative. In fact, sometimes it can help you find the right angle, and I always try to find the right angle. This concerns golf. Believe it or not, I found out several years ago that there are actually professional miniature golfers. It's not their full-time job, but they actually go to tournaments all around the country, and they compete in miniature golf, and they can win $3,000, $5,000 for winning one of these tournaments. So when I found out about that, I thought, well, that's pretty funny. That would be a nice magazine article. But I didn't think I had the right angle for the story, or how to approach that story. So I waited a little bit, and then I found out that there's actually an event that takes place every October, I believe, called the Masters of Miniature Golf. It's the national championship of miniature golf. The greatest mini golfers from all over the world converge in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and they compete for this tournament. And I thought, okay, that's a nice structure for the story. It's a better way to present the story. I still didn't think I quite had the right angle. And then I came up with an interesting idea. I thought, what if I actually compete in a tournament? What if I try to win the Masters of Miniature Golf, and I write about it from that angle, sort of my Walter Mitty account of competing in the Masters of mini golf. And so I convinced the magazine to let me do that. I convinced the tournament to let me into the tournament, which wasn't very difficult. I went to South Carolina, and I competed, and there were 31 golfers in the tournament. 28 of them were essentially professional miniature golfers, really good. I mean, they usually get a hole-in-one. The worst they ever get is a 2 on a hole, from all over the world. That was 28 of them. 2 of them were a couple of grandparents on vacation in Myrtle Beach who entered the tournament, and one was myself. And I actually got a hole-in-one on my first 2 holes, and I started thinking, I'm going to win this thing. Forget the story, I'm going to win this thing. Well, it turns out after 72 holes, out of the 31 golfers, I finished 31st. I finished in last place. The grandparents beat me. That's exactly right. It was one of the best stories I ever wrote. It was about how I finished in last place in the Masters of Miniature Golf, because rule number 1 of writing is show, don't tell, right? Rather than me telling the reader, hey, these are really intense, talented golfers, I showed them this by showing how bad I was compared to them. It was a much better way to tell the story, and I really love that story. It was hugely embarrassing to finish in last place, but it was a great story. Which brings up another great way to spur a great idea, which is simply this: participate. If something happens to me and I think someone might like to read about it, then I would certainly write about it. The very first story that I ever had published anywhere when I was in high school was for my high school newspaper. And what happened was, when I was about 13 or 14 years old, along with my twin brother, I had this great opportunity. I grew up in Chicago. I got to be, for one game, I got to be a bat boy for the Chicago White Sox. So I got to wear a uniform. They had really ugly uniforms that year, but I had to wear a uniform. I sat in the dugout next to my favorite players during a real Major League Baseball game. And the first thing I thought was, I want to write about this. And that was a pretty good indication that maybe I was going to be a writer someday. But even at that young age, I realized that a great way to tell a story is by surprising the reader a little bit, tell it in a unique way. So I didn't want to just say, hey, I was a bat boy, I met my favorite players, I sat in the dugout, the end. That's boring. It turns out, the way I told the story was, it turns out that the day I was the bat boy, which was May 26, 1983, on that day, the Chicago White Sox were the worst team in baseball. They were terrible. They were in last place. However, from that day on that season, they were the best team in baseball. So it turns out that they made the playoffs, they almost made the World Series. The day they turned their whole season around was the day that I was the bad boy. So the article that I wrote that was published in the newspaper, my high school newspaper, was about how clearly, unquestionably, I was the MVP of the Chicago Cubs. It was just a silly idea, but it was a compelling story. They published it. I saw my name, I saw my byline in the newspaper, and I thought, oh my goodness, I want to see my name everywhere. I think I want to be a writer. But that was because I had this experience that I decided that I wanted to write about it. So sometimes the experiences can lead to the writing. Sometimes the urge to write can lead to the experiences. I've written 3 travel memoirs. One of them, the first one, was when my wife and I were living in Chicago. We were recently married. This was a long time ago. I was looking at an atlas one day, and I looked at the fine print. And by the way, the fine print is where I get some of my best ideas. That's where everyone ignores the fine print. That's where all the good ideas are. In the fine print of the atlas, I saw these tiny little towns named after virtues. Harmony, California; Wisdom, Montana; Love, Virginia; Justice, West Virginia; Friendship, Maine, etc. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to explore those places and looking for those virtues? These are little towns of 100 people, 200 people. So I turned to my wife and I said, how'd you like to scrape up all our money, get a big old RV, travel around the country for a year, and I'll try to write a book about it. And to my surprise, she said, sure. So then we had to do it. And that's how we ended up moving to Pacific Grove. It was a 48-state home search. And I wrote a book called States of Mind about searching for virtue in those places named after virtues. And that led to 2 other travel memoirs. So that was the writer in me creating experiences. But sometimes the experiences can create the writing in